Well, there she is, Home Secretary Priti Patel. You may have noticed, even though the audience was small, the applause was pretty lukewarm. Why? We've been hearing it over and over and over from Priti Patel. And when she says, I make no apology for securing our borders, well, you haven't secured our borders at all. And then, of course, she says, oh, those that come in illegally by boat could face up to 4 years in prison. Really? Is that right? So you've got to find 17,000 prison places for the next 4 years. None of it is going to happen. And threatening people smugglers with life imprisonment, well, to begin with, no one believes they'd ever serve life anyway. And the financial rewards for these gangs are so massive, whatever the penalties, there will still be people there to ply this trade. And finally, my comment on what she had to say. She said, we will deport people who come illegally into our country. So far this year, we have not deported one single person who was coming across the English Channel. So I don't think her speech is worth a row of beans. I don't think it makes any difference whatsoever. But then, I accept, this is a story, an issue around which I have strong opinions. So let's go to Tony Smith, former Director General of UK Border Force. Tony, good evening. Thank you for joining us here on GB News. I know that you're, a full-time border security consultant these days. Tell me, have I got this wrong? Will Priti's speech make a big difference to what's happening in the English Channel?
Well, I think the first point, Nigel, is that you're right. There's nothing new in the speech today that we haven't heard already before. And, I have personally given evidence to the Home Affairs Committee and to the Bill Committee on this matter, written a lot of stuff about it. The government's mission is a bold one because they are at least, Nigel, trying to distinguish asylum seekers that come on, say, third country routes from others. That hasn't been the case up to now. And they're doing that by reinterpreting Article 31 of the UN Convention. Prior to that, as you probably well know, Nigel, I'm sorry, I'm probably preaching to somebody who knows as much about this as I do, because you were there. But as you know, there's been significant judicial overreach by the European Court of Justice on asylum judgments, which basically tied our hands in terms of anybody who arrived from anywhere, frankly, at our border, merely had to mention the word asylum, and the Border Force are not empowered, Nigel, to do anything other than basic screening, fingerprints checks and search, and then off they go into a system which, as you know, is unending. So what the bill tries to do is say, well, actually, you're not immediately fleeing persecution, are you, from a war zone if you're coming? And so our interpretation of that article is different to the one that the European courts have always done. And so therefore we're changing our law. And I think you've got to give a credit for that, Nigel, because I think there are a lot of politicians who might balk from that. I expect this bill will have a lot of comment in the Lords, and there will be a lot of it in the justice system that will be trembling at the idea that we would simply say no. You can't enter our asylum system because you came on that route. And I've got a lot of opponents who will argue with me that it's not illegal to do this. So she's trying to make it illegal, Nigel, to do this. Okay. So I think we have to give credit for that. But I mean, will it work?
No, Tony, I'll take that point of her interpretation. I've no doubt. In a moment, I'm going to talk to an immigration lawyer who may take a different view, as is often the case with legal interpretations. But the point, Tony, I'm making is that since August 2019, she's talked tough on this, and all that's happened is that it's got worse and worse. And now she's talking about turning around the boats. Now, look, I'd love to see the boats being turned around, and we saw Australia turning around the boats. But, our border force, in your opinion, our border force actually going to turn these dinghies around?
Well, that's extraordinarily difficult, Nigel. Again, you know this very well. You've been out there. You know those waterways, and you know these vessels that are coming. What the Australians did was quite different. That was a very, very long route from Indonesia. The Australians actually re-equipped their fleet so they could interview people on board their vessels, Nigel. They actually towed out their own vessels and took the people off of the ones that they were in and put them into different vessels and towed them back and escorted them back to Indonesia. Very different operation to dealing with small people, dinghies, you know what's going to happen. You know what you'll be out there. I expect our media will be out there. And the moment that they try to do anything like this, babies will be thrown into the water. Yeah. We're dealing with human smugglers who have no regard for human life. The real answer, which I've been saying all along, is we have to get the French to agree to joint patrols, interdictions and returns. And I'm afraid we can't really control what they do. Nigel, we've got them to do quite a lot, and I do support the gendarmerie. If you've seen the pictures, they are out there in the sand dunes late at night getting beaten up by people trying to stop them getting on. But the policy, as you well know, once they're on the water, the French government has said, au revoir. Not our problem.
Yeah.
That
is nonsense, isn't it? Which, Tony,
yes.
I mean, France has very strict maritime laws. So if you or I had our own private boat, say moored in Boulogne Harbour, as there are hundreds of private boats and people go out angling or go out for pleasure, they have to pass a series of tests. And if you're found at sea by the French authorities on a boat that has not done the right tests and you haven't got the right certificates, you'll be towed back into port and given a very big fine. So for a French citizen, or for us owning a boat in France, taking to those seas will get penalised. And yet what we have seen are migrant boats in 3 feet of water, where they could have waded back to the shore, escorted effectively by the French Navy across to British lines. That isn't good enough, Tony, is it?
No, you're spot on, Nigel. That is the problem. They are using their interpretation of maritime law, which is frankly wrong, to exercise their policy requirement, which is to say, this is not our problem, and that is a political decision by the French government. There is provision in international law, Nigel. I could bore your listeners for hours talking about the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, but there is provision, certainly, for us to come to an agreement with them, but they won't. And I think therein lies the problem.
Tony, we'll talk to you again because this story isn't going away. Thank you for joining us tonight on GB News.